This is our time certain 145, and it's a disaster relief and mitigation funding presentation. Amy Bidwell. Amy's with the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Committee.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Amy Bidwell, Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. I am here to talk about some disaster relief and mitigation funding opportunities on behalf of the TBRPC and the Citrus County Local Mitigation Strategy Work Group. Today's presentation, I'm going to give an overview of the Local Mitigation Strategy Plan and Work Group.
Sir, could you let the scientists go outside and address them in the foyer? Thank you. Sorry, Amy, go ahead.
I'm going to talk about Citrus County's vulnerability assessment through the Florida Resilient Grant Program. I'm going to discuss some funding opportunities and their correlation to the LMS plan and the vulnerability assessment. There are a couple of additional resources that I want to talk about, and then we will discuss next steps, and I will take any questions and answer them to the best of my ability. The Local Mitigation Strategy Plan, or LMS plan, the purpose of it was, one, it's a requirement of the Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000. The plan is to promote mitigation initiatives and to improve resilience to all hazards posing a threat to the communities within Citrus County. This plan is multi-jurisdictional, and it includes the cities of Crystal River and Inverness. They must adopt this plan, as well as Citrus County does. In the plan is a mitigation project list. This list is adopted with the plan, and this allows it to become eligible for certain types of funding for mitigation throughout the county. This plan also serves as the floodplain management plan, which is also connected and tied into the community rating system and the National Flood Insurance Program. For the National Flood Insurance Program, I do want to mention that it is documentation of the the CRS program, excuse me. Let me go back there. There we go. The community rating system in the NFIP. The LMS plan serves as documentation of that 10-step process, which helps gain credit so that insurance policyholders receive discounts on their flood insurance policies. So that's the important correlation with CRS and the LMS plan itself. The Local Mitigation Strategy Working Group is a working group which is also multi-jurisdictional, consists of the cities of Crystal River and Inverness, and each have representation on the work group. It can also have a wide variety of members, local and regional agencies, such as the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council, other local departments within the county, your stormwater, your floodplain management, emergency management. It's made up of many different members from different groups, different businesses, concerned citizens. You can have realtors associations, building associations, basically all interested parties can be a member on the working group. They're responsible for reviewing the LMS plan's goals and objectives and revising them as necessary. The review of technical analysis and planning activities of the plan. They approve the proposed mitigation initiatives for incorporation into the plan project list, and they determine a prioritization method and the prioritization for implementation of those initiatives. So at every working group meeting, they do review the mitigation project list. Project can be added to the list at any time during the year and voted on. It is very important that these projects are placed on the list because that makes them eligible for funding. If, for example, Hazard Mitigation Grant Program funding comes up within a year for Hurricane Idalia, if the project is not on that list, it is not eligible. So it's very important to note that that is the number one main importance of that mitigation project list.
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Kennard.
Well, I guess the first two important questions are, one, do we have a local mitigation strategy work group?
Yes. We do.
Okay, good. And does that work group have a plan?
Yes, yes. In fact, I was going to get to that later, but we are in a year where the LMS plan is coming to expiration. It expires on September 14th, 2025. Citrus County has contracted the TBRPC to conduct that 5-year update. So I will be assisting the county in updating that plan, the mitigation project list, and I will be doing that through your local mitigation strategy working group.
Very good. And our plan, this 5-year plan, does that consist exclusively or primarily of infrastructure projects or individual homeowner opportunities, community opportunities, commercial industry opportunities, things like that?
All of those projects can exist on the project list. Currently, right now, I do not believe that there are any homeowner or household level projects. There are stormwater structure, enhancing firehouses, generators for school boards, those types of things.
Okay. But the individual homeowners or commercial interests, because we've got one city that sits almost entirely within floodplain. So individual homeowner opportunities for funding, that needs to get on our list,
Yes,
as well as the commercial entities, opportunities that might be out there, need to get on that list as well. All right.
correct, yes. And we can, adding a project to the list is not only at the annual update or the 5-year update. We can add projects throughout the year and vote on them at the LMS meeting, and that approves them and makes them eligible for funding.
Great.
A good
Great,
example,
thank you.
a shelter was a good example that should be added on that list. Or FEMA's been putting out a bunch of things for funding. When I talked to Amy, we need to get those on this list to allow us to let the citizens actually go after this funding. But all those things, I think this week you'll be meeting, I think, to vote to add some more things on that list.
Yes.
No, I'm good.
Commissioner Bays?
I think it might be helpful, since it's been brought up, to explain the SBA for commercial and residential property, and that is kind of the resource from how
Correct.
they would get funded.
Yeah, if you give me a couple of minutes, I have a whole slide dedicated to SBA. I also want to give a brief overview of the vulnerability assessment. It's through the Florida Resilient Grant Program, which is part of the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. Citrus County and TBRPC will be conducting this vulnerability assessment. It is to meet the requirements of State Statute 380 to identify or address risks of inland or coastal flooding and sea level rise. This VA, for short, vulnerability assessment, must encompass the entire county or municipality. Citrus County and the city of Inverness will be included in this VA. I believe that Crystal River has done their own. Types of analysis, it must include the depth of tidal flooding, including future high tide flooding, current and future storm surge flooding, to the extent practicable, rainfall-induced flooding, and a combination of all three. This will also result in a mitigation project list. When this VA is completed, it will be adopted as part of the LMS plan, which opens these projects up to 2 avenues of funding. Florida Resilient Program has future funding for implementation of those projects, but you cannot apply for it until the vulnerability assessment is done. In addition to that, the mitigation projects that come from this assessment will be placed on the mitigation project list for the LMS and will be open to HMGP funding as well. Any questions about the VAs?
Yeah, do we have an idea? Did I miss it when the vulnerability assessment study's gonna be done?
So that will, hopefully, we have been waiting on the contract notice to proceed from FDEP, which I believe may be close. So I'm hoping to begin that in January and run it concurrent with the LMS plan update.
So we wouldn't be starting that vulnerability assessment until January.
Correct.
And do we have an idea of how long that will take to
The
complete?
close date on that grant is March 31st, 2025.
So the study, the vulnerability study is gonna take over a year to complete it.
Mhm.
And then once it's complete, then some of these projects can go on the LMS plan? Am I understanding this properly?
Yes and no. So as we identify mitigation projects through this assessment, we can go ahead and add them to the mitigation list for the plan, the LMS plan, because we can add those at any time throughout the year.
Okay,
They'll be eligible for HMGP funding at that point, but they won't be available for the future Florida Resilient Grant programs until the VA is closed out.
okay, all right. And that, you said
Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, HMGP.
so as soon as we can put projects on our plan whenever we want to.
Mhm.
They would be eligible for that, but they would not be eligible for the second source of funding that you mentioned. That has to wait until after the VA is done.
Correct.
Okay. Sorry
Well,
about
it-
that.
yeah,
Just
it'll
trying to
be-
Understand it all.
Those projects that we identify, we will put immediately into the LMS plan so that they're eligible for the HMGP funding.
Okay. All
But
right.
they won't be available for the Florida Resilient Grant programs until after close of the VA.
Okay.
Any other questions on the vulnerability assessments?
Guess not. Carry on.
Now I'm going to get more deep into the funding opportunities and start with Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, which we've been talking a little bit about. The home or project must be located in a state that received a presidential disaster declaration. Your state and community must have an approved hazard mitigation plan, which Citrus County does, as well as so the state. They have just approved their update for their local mitigation or their statewide mitigation strategy. For projects located within a special flood hazard area, those are your flood zones that FEMA determines, your A, your X, XE, the velocity zones and such. The local community must be a member of the National Flood Insurance Program that is in good standing, which I know that Citrus County is, and you have a rating with the community rating system as well. Projects must be cost-effective, technically feasible, and environmentally sound. These are determinations that FEMA will make as they review the application to make sure that all of these are in order. Individuals cannot apply directly for HMGP funding. So if we put household projects on the list, they will be filtered through the county and managed through county staff. There is a cost share. 75% of the hazard mitigation projects comes from the funding itself, and then the cost share to the project owner is 25%. If they do have another source of funding, that is acceptable. So if we identify another grant, they can take up that other 25%, then we can do a combination of that.
Question.
Commissioner Kennard.
So the individuals, if an individual decides they want to mitigate, they want to raise their house, they would come to the county or they would come to this group, this LMS group, and ask that their project be put on the list, which would make them eligible for this HMGP funding.
Yes.
And that funding, I would assume there's criteria that needs to be met in order for them to be awarded this 75% funding. I had heard at one point that that was a competitive grant. What does that mean? Who are they? I mean, is there just so much funding and they award it by which one's been flooded the most, or a
Right.
set of criteria? Or
So what happens after a disaster declaration is this HMGP funding becomes available. It doesn't become available until sometime the following year. So it's not a quick process. It's not for your immediate needs. You know, somebody needs to demolish a home. I don't recommend HMGP. Okay. So where was I going with that?
How they qualify.
I'd asked about it being competitive.
Yeah, so sometime next August, we might start hearing about HMGP for Idalia, okay? There are 3 different tiers. Those tiers of funding are gonna be determined by the state, and then the state will determine which counties are in each tier. So they're different levels of funding, okay? These are partially based on your damage assessments So if you're meeting your damage assessment thresholds, you're going to be in a higher tier. Obviously, in areas like Citrus County, Hernando County, we flooded and got hit pretty bad. You'll probably be in the tier with the most funding. Then that's where it becomes competitive. So you would have to make decisions in your own project list, which these get prioritized when they get added to the list based on a certain criteria that is established by the working group. And you can choose to send which projects you want. So the competitiveness is between your own projects,
Okay.
okay? So you send those up and then the state reviews everything and they pick which applications they're going to fund. Does that
So
make
the
sense?
state decides those projects off of our list, the local group does not.
No, the local group chooses which ones they're going to send to the state. And they send
Okay.
those applications up, and then the state reviews them and chooses which ones they're going to fund.
Okay, based on the total amount of funding that you were awarded?
Based on your total amount of funding, based on what priority, if you have a priority one project and you want to send this, an individual business or household or something that is ranked lower on the priority list, they're going to look at that prioritization as well when they determine funding. So
Okay,
it might not get funded if it's lower prioritized
okay,
on the list.
all right.
Commissioner Finnegan.
Question for you. I think this is the right funding program. We were sent a lot of information. When I looked a little deeper into this information, when you talk about qualification for that, I believe I read that it had to be someone with FEMA insurance. And is it not so much the number of times of flooding, but the number of times that they've submitted and FEMA paid out? Is that correct?
No, not for HMGP. That would be under flood mitigation or assistance, or if they're going after a claim on their own insurance, flood insurance policies. And then you're getting into increased cost of compliance and, the 50-50 rule, which I'm going to get into here in a couple of slides. But
So for any homeowner that maybe inherited the house or it's a house that's paid for, if they've flooded repeatedly, they would still qualify for this.
they could apply for HMGP.
Thank you.
Board, any other questions? Go ahead, Amy.
Flood mitigation assistance. These funds may be used for repetitive flood damage to buildings that are insured under the National Flood Insurance Program. These can be community flood mitigation projects or individual structures and property level mitigation projects. Again, the projects must be cost effective. They must be located in an NFIP community, which Citrus County is. And applicant requirements, the local government applies on behalf of the project owner. Individual structured property level mitigation projects that mitigate the risk of flooding, insured structure, NFIP insured structures give priority to the properties meeting, so they have to meet severe repetitive loss or repetitive loss definitions. These types of projects are your acquisitions, your demolitions. In some instances, it could be an elevation if there's an opportunity to elevate a home. Sometimes they'll do acquisition and relocation. Each application is going to be different. These are your more homeowner level coastal type properties where they can elevate a home. If they have to demolish and build within the same footprint, they can build up, and sometimes they will fund those types of projects. The severe repetitive loss federal cost share information, FEMA may contribute 100% towards a severe repetitive loss, depending on what the mitigation effort is going to be. If it's such a severe repetitive loss that the structure has been flooded 3 or 4 times, elevating that structure might not be something that they want to fund. It might be a replacement or an acquisition type fund. Repetitive loss federal cost share information for repetitive loss, FEMA may contribute up to 90%. Typically, they take the assessed value of the home for that determination on what they're going to fund. It's a lengthy process. It's not easy, and again, it has to be filtered through the county.
Commissioner Kennard.
And this avenue of funding, does that have to wait until after the VA is done also?
No.
Okay, that just the individuals would have to apply to this group, get on the list, and then pursue this avenue? The
Correct.
county or that group would pursue that avenue of funding for them?
The county staff would have to make the application and assist the homeowner through the entire process. This type of funding is annual funding, so it's not disaster constricted. Not a lot of people probably know about it as homeowners, so it might be something that would be more of a public outreach, or if you know of severe repetitive loss areas, because we can't directly contact a severe repetitive loss property, but something to send out to the areas so that they're aware of this funding, and they would come to you and seek this application.
Okay, all right.
Thank you. Commissioner Davis?
No, I'm good. I'm good.
You're pointing at me.
No.
Go ahead, Amy.
Okay. The National Flood Insurance Program has an increased cost of compliance coverage that a lot of people don't know about. When they get their flood insurance policies, it's not necessarily one of those things that they advertise, but if they have received flood damage and their policy is up to date, they can ask for increased cost of compliance coverage. So if they have to bring their home up to code, or even demolition, they can ask for an extra $30,000 from the NFIP to help fund whatever it is that they need to do to their home. In addition, it must meet one of two conditions. It must have been determined substantially damaged, so that's where your 50-50 rule comes in. The determination by the community that the damage due to flooding has equaled or exceeded 50% of the value of the building. So the county would have to make that determination that a property is substantially damaged, and then the homeowner could then ask for that $30,000 to help them with better, the mitigation project or demolition. And it must be considered a repetitive loss. That means that the building covered by flood insurance incurred flood-related damage 2 times over a period of 10 years, and the cost of repairs on average, it was at least 25% of the market value of the building before the damage occurred each time. And I don't believe that those have to be consecutive instances. It just has to be within that 10-year period. So I don't think I don't think they had to flood this year and next year. It could be, 7 years ago with Hermine and a couple weeks ago with Idalia. And it doesn't have to be a balanced 50-50. If it incurred 35% of the market value damage last time and 25% this time, whatever it's assessed at, they're not counting it in that manner.
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
This is a question that came up initially after Idalia. A couple neighbors had asked, does that stay with the structure across the sale of a house? If the house flooded at 50% with one owner, but then sold, and now it's flooded again at 50 or 75% damage, does that still, I guess those 2 flooding events, that stays with the structure, not with per owner?
Right, that's a real gray line. If a homeowner comes to you for substantial damage determination, then that stays with that structure.
Okay,
If they didn't come to you, then no, it's like starting over.
if the previous owner had come in as well, though, and then
It stays
then they
with the
come in.
structure.
Okay,
Yes.
all right, thank you.
Commissioner Bays?
A point of clarification, so if a house has actually been declared 50% or more damaged, at that point in time, if the county has determined that, they would have to bring that house up to current code.
Yes,
And if you don't do that, if the county reneges on that, then you are in jeopardy of losing your CRA credit.
Yeah, once you have made a substantial determination, it can't be taken back. It stays with the property. It would affect your CRS, yes.
Yes, the counties, which gets passed on to the consumer. I think they get up to 25% discount on their flood insurance as long as you're in good standing.
Yeah, it depends on your rating. I'm not sure what rate the Citrus County is at, but yes, whatever, there's different ranks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and they get, 20, 25% and so forth with the better rating.
And I think it's important for the people to know that when there's some people that they don't owe anything on their house, they don't have a mortgage, they'll forego the flood insurance. And so once they forego the flood insurance, they lose all those discounts. If you keep it and you pay it and you sell your home, that policy is then transferable. The next owner can assume that with those built-in discounts. So I think that's an important factor for everybody that lives in these zones that particularly flood, to recognize that keeping your flood policy can help you when you go to sell your house.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Any other questions on repetitive loss?
Board, any other questions? Okay.
There's also the Hurricane Loss Mitigation Program, HLMP. This program's a little bit different than HMGP. $3.5 million in grant funding goes to governmental entities, nonprofit organizations, and qualified for-profit organizations. This is a means, again, to mitigate, improve resiliency of community. This funding is noticed through a request for proposal, so it's something that homeowners would have to search for and see if they're, accepting applications for at the time. They do not do notice of funding opportunities for it. It requires a benefit cost analysis for each submitted project. And also, contract grants, you can apply at any time throughout the year, but there is a strict June 30th close date, no matter what time throughout the year you have applied. So it's a year-long opening. You apply anytime, but there's really hard constraints on the timeline, and a lot of mitigation projects between technical analysis and engineering and getting them funded, and it's very time constraining. So that would be something for easier projects, quicker projects, things that aren't, not elevations that are going to take a whole lot of geotechnical engineering and time to design and build up. The state fiscal year is July 1st through June 30th, and July 1st is when this funding opens annually, and then the following June it ends.
So one,
Commissioner Kennard, Commissioner Bays was first, and then.
all right.
Does that follow the insurance rules that has to be determined if it's a hurricane grant, that it has to be from windborne damage versus flood damage?
No, this is a hurricane loss mitigation program. Could be for any type of mitigation. It could be for wind mitigation. It's not declaration specific. It's not disaster specific. It's more of a preparedness mitigative initiative.
Gotcha. Okay.
Commissioner Kennard.
So the application period, it sounds to me like is July 1st or first part of July, and then it closes the following June 30th, and the entire project from being evaluated, funded, and then the entire project completed has to be done within that 1 year cycle?
Yes.
Oh my.
Yeah, it's very, very restrictive.
So replacing windows, it sounds like.
Yeah. Floodproofing, something,
Okay,
that can be done quickly.
okay.
We spoke a little bit about the Florida Resilient Grant Program. It is through the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. It includes a selection of grants that are available to counties, municipalities, water management districts, and flood control districts, and regional resilience entities. The state is really looking hard at the impacts of flooding, particularly the combination of rainfall, sea level rise, just trying to figure out at what point things fail. So we're doing these vulnerability assessments, we're identifying projects for the project lists, and their future funding is all around implementation of those projects. I know I already said this and talked about it a little bit, but it's very important to make sure that we're getting the right projects on those lists so that they can be funded in the future, especially for the implementation projects with this grant. If they're not on that list, they could be in the LMS, but if they're not on this list with this vulnerability assessment, then they can't be implemented through this funding. They have annual funding cycles. It must be completed prior to applying for future funding. The
Okay.
correlation, sorry, was there a question?
Go ahead.
Okay. The correlation of the LMS plan, the project list and the vulnerability assessment, I've talked about. Without your local mitigation strategy and your local mitigation strategy working group, you're not able to have that mitigation project list that makes these projects eligible. You really want to beef up that project list to make sure that you have as much on there as possible, because you never know what the actual impacts are going to be of a disaster until after it happens, right? So if it's not on the list, then you won't be able to apply for it. And in addition, as I spoke to the Florida Resilient Grant Program, the vulnerability assessment projects will be placed on that mitigation list within the LMS plan as well, so that those are available for future Florida Resilient funding and HMGP funding. There are other programs that require their projects that you apply for. For example, NOAA has several grants out right now. A requirement of them is that the project is on your hazard mitigation list. So there are more and more grants coming out that make that a requirement of funding. Additional resources. Sometimes after HMGP funding, the cycle closes, there's funding left over that counties just didn't apply for. Sometimes that leftover funding may be offered in an appropriation. That means that any projects that weren't funded the first round, or another project on your list that you want to send for funding, if it meets the amount, then you can go ahead and apply for that. Again, it's disaster specific. If there is appropriation, the state will determine which counties are eligible for that. Small Business Administration. I don't know all of the details about the SBA loans, but I'll do my best to answer any questions that you may have. These are low-interest disaster loans to individuals and households to help with disaster losses. They are disaster specific. FEMA works with the SBA to determine qualification for personal property assistance. If FEMA sees that you qualify, if a household level, a homeowner calls FEMA, wants to see if they qualify for assistance. If the FEMA individuals see that they would qualify for the SBA loan, then FEMA will direct them to SBA. And they will do that automatically. Homeowners may apply for up to $500,000 for a declared disaster on or after July 31st. These funds are to repair or replace damaged homes. They may not be used to make upgrades or additions unless they are required by the local building code. So if it's in a severe repetitive loss area, then it's not going to repair a severe repetitive loss. It might replace it, but with the severe repetitive loss areas, SBA is not typically loaning to repair something that's been flooded and flooded and flooded that severely. SBA may be able to refinance a previous mortgage if the homeowner doesn't have enough credit elsewhere. They also offer up to $100,000 for declared disaster to replace or repair personal property. This means that if you've lost all of your furniture and your clothing or a car, things of that nature, your personal property, they will also open up application for that. So you can get up to $100,000 for that. Does not apply to secondary or vacation homes. It must be a primary residence. That's very important to remember because I know that we have, a seasonal population. So if we do start, doing public outreach or letting people know about this loan to make sure that it is their primary residence. Proceeds from insurance coverage on homes. If they make an insurance claim and they receive proceeds from their insurance company for the damage, that is deducted from the amount of the loan. So they will not double pay out for the same damages. Current SBA disaster loan availability for Hurricane Idalia, it was issued on September 9th of 2023. The application deadline is November 8th. So it's coming to a close soon. They also do economic injury loan applications, and that doesn't close until June 10th of 2024.
You said November 8th?
November 8th for homeowners.
Thank you.
So some next steps, the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council, myself, and the Local Mitigation Strategy Working Group will be working to conduct that 5-year update of the LMS plan. And that is going to run from January of 2024 through August of 2025. That plan expires September 14th of 2025. The vulnerability assessment will be running concurrently, although that closes a little bit earlier of March of 2025. But the goal is to have that done prior so that when we adopt the LMS plan update, it'll already be a part of it. HMGP funding for Hurricane Idalia. They send out their notices very early on. I'm sure everybody has received multiple flyers about funding availability. However, we probably will not hear anything about it until August of next year. Typically, it's 1 year after the incident that we start receiving notice of funding opportunities. The best bet short term for immediate would be to make sure that people know about that increased cost of compliance through their national flood insurance policies. A lot of people don't know that they can ask for that $30,000, and that would help a lot with mitigating or even demolition. And the Small Business Administration, the loans. Any questions about any of those? No?
Nothing for me.
Any questions about anything?
The additional $30,000, what should homeowners ask? What is the verbiage they should use with their insurance company?
So I know that a lot of inquiries are made through the floodplain management or building division. So if they've incurred damage, the first step would be to see if it was substantial damage, if they have an insurance policy. And I know that Carla has been putting out, when people call in, giving them information about that increased cost of compliance. But in that conversation is where it needs to happen. A little bit of public outreach to those areas would probably be the best avenue, because a lot of people don't know about it, and if they're not calling to find out what they need to do to permit to upgrade their structures, then you'll never know on your end. So
And Carla's in the loop with the mitigation.
She absolutely. She was actually present last week. That's really why I wanted this meeting or this discussion we had last week, because all these flyers are going out. Sounds like all this money's ready to be collected, and there's like a year behind. So I wanted to make sure the public understood. We're going to put this out on social media platforms, but Carla was present with us as well. So our staff is up to speed with where we're at today.
Very good.
And Amy lives local. I keep threatening her. We're going to put her in office here because she's so knowledgeable. I said so. She commutes a little bit, but she is local. So thank you
Yes.
for your efforts and You're doing a great job. Thank you for doing
thank
this
you.
today. It's a lot of information. It's comprehensive. And there's just a lot of pieces, and a lot of people throughout the community are saying that we've got grants for citizens and things like that, but it's not quite that simple.
Amy used to work with us.
I did. Yes.
I would just remind everybody there is a difference between a FEMA policy and a private flood policy. So,
Yes.
you know, make sure that you understand the language of your policies and what they offer, whether it's especially flood on ACV or replacement cost. There's some varying degrees in flood.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Davis? Thank you so much. Okay. Mr. Howard, is there anything else you'd like to say on mitigation?
That's all. I think we're gonna make sure we put that on social media platforms, and we're gonna continue to the messaging, to the public of maybe some of these opportunities they can take advantage of, and continue to work with the public.
Very good.